We're going back about 10 years for this one, but this was without a doubt one of the worst nights in my life, and it's one that all started on New Year's Eve. A few friends of mine all congregated in one of our parents' houses, doing some pre-drinking before we were due to head out to a New Year's party. We got toasty on a few tins, then ended up getting a taxi into the city center, where there was this massive student house in the Georgian Quarter where a load of locals and students alike had gathered to get bladdered and see in the new year. It was a decent enough party at first, like everyone seemed nice and friendly, and whoever lived there had to put in a great deal of effort to make people feel welcome, putting out snacks, ice for drinks, rigging up a big old speaker system to pump out the tunes, that sort of thing. Then at one point during the night, I noticed a few lads wandering around the party who looked like they didn't exactly belong there. It wasn't because of how they looked or dressed, like there was a big mix of people there from all different backgrounds, and it definitely made for a better atmosphere. The thing that got me was that while everyone was engaged in conversation or the like, drinking or dancing or whatever, these lads seemed to be just looking around, like they were just lost or looking for someone. I never really thought much of it at the time, though, like there was so many different people going in and out of the house all the time. I'd never been there before, hardly knew any of the people who actually lived in the house, so I wasn't really to know who should and shouldn't have been there, and it's not like I was about to start playing bouncer or security guard or whatever. Then, like an hour or so later, I'm in the kitchen trying to fish one of my cans of cider out of an already overstocked fridge, when someone walks up to me with this anxious look on their face. "Hi, do you know that guy in the waterproof jacket that's been walking around?" It was one of the students who actually lived in the house. Me? No, I thought you knew them," I reply, taking out a can and cracking it open. "No, I thought they were with you," they reply, looking a bit more nervous as they're talking. There's a sort of awkward pause in the conversation before the person asks, "Can you get them to leave?" This was exactly the sort of thing I was trying to avoid. Like I said, I wasn't up for playing bouncer, and I was pretty bloody confused as to why they were asking me to do so. Mate, it's not my house. It's not my party. I'm not gonna go around telling people that they can't be here," I say before wading through the crowds to find my mates. A little while later, I realized I couldn't see any of the dodgy-looking guys hanging around the party, so I just thought it had been dealt with by someone else. But then, the fella who'd asked me to kick them out comes up to me and actually thanks me for getting rid of them. Again, there's this moment of confusion where I'm like, "I didn't do anything, mate. They must have just left on their own." I really thought that was the end of it, but boy was I wrong. I remember being pretty drunk by the time I nipped upstairs to use the third-floor toilet, one that had some windows looking into the street out the front of the building. So I'm standing there, draining the main vein, just sort of blankly staring out the window when I see this car pull up. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a car with a few lads piling out. I watch them go around to the boot, open it up, then start to pull out mass. I did a kind of double take like, what is this? They were pulling out ski masks, balaclavas, all sorts of stuff like that, followed by baseball bats, hockey sticks, knives, all kinds of blunt and sharp weapons. My brain was just slowed by the alcohol, I think, and I remember thinking, someone's in for a rough night, only realizing it was us that was in trouble when they started heading up the pathway towards the house, the same party house which had an open, unlocked door to allow pretty much anyone and everyone to just wander in and out at their leisure. The night was about to go very, very wrong for us. I don't think I even finished up my pee properly, at least I have no memory of doing so. The only thing I remember is rushing back to the room where my mates were chilling, just in time to hear a load of screaming and shouting coming from the ground floor. I just remember saying, "We need to get out of here, now." But my mates were so blitzed that they just sort of looked back at me in confusion like, "Why? What's up?" Not even bothering to move at first. I grabbed my jacket from off the floor, trying to tell them what I'd just seen, and what I just heard coming from downstairs, but I think I was so scared and drunk that it all just came out as a babble at first. I think maybe they just thought I was pulling their leg at first, that I was just playing some daft prank on them. I get it. The mood went from 0 to 100 really bloody fast, and I can totally understand their confusion. But then all of a sudden this lad appears in the doorway of the room we were occupying, wearing a gaiter over the bottom half of his face, with a baseball bat in his hand. Only then did they really realize how serious I'd been. The lad just instantly took a swing at my mate, who was closest to the door, and he only barely got out of the way in time. The lad then just starts shouting at us to stay seated, but to throw our phones into the middle of the room. There's a moment of hesitation, and the lad decides to let us know how serious he is by smashing a stereo near to him. I mean, he swung so hard with the baseball bat that he just obliterated that thing with one swing. That was all it took to get us to comply, and we all tossed our phones into a rough pile in the middle of the room. We thought he'd just grab them and leg it, but that wasn't enough for him. He starts asking for wallets, MP3 players, anything of any value, basically for us to empty our pockets. While this is going on, I can see all kinds of chaos unfolding in the hallway outside the room we're in. Lads are getting brave with the invaders only to get smacked in the face with brass knuckles or hockey sticks. Girls are getting pulled by their hair down the hall, falling over their high heels and getting carpet burn from getting dragged along the carpet. God knows what happened to them after they got their phones or wallets stolen. A few of us tossed our empty wallets next to our phones, but since only a few of us did, this masked guy thinks the rest of us are holding out on him. He doesn't smash an appliance this time, though. He edges forward and swings the bat down onto my mate's shoulders. Jesus Christ, the scream that came out of him after the impact was just unreal. Like I knew in an instant that he'd broken something, and he just falls down to the carpet and starts grimacing in agony. The fella's all like, "I told you, wallets now." Maybe one or two more wallets get tossed into the pile, but there are still lads sat around who basically haven't thrown anything in the middle of the room, and the fella with the baseball bat has noticed this. He takes another swing at the lad whose shoulder he'd just smashed, bringing the bat down hard onto his side with this horrible, sickening thumping sound. It totally knocks the wind out of him, and if I didn't know any better, I'd have thought the gasping noises he were making were him properly dying. One of the guys blurts out that he's got nothing on him, that all his stuff is in the living room downstairs. I think he was one of the guys who actually lived in the house. This answer didn't satisfy the masked fella, who then smacks the downed broken bones guy for a third or fourth time and gets him absolutely screaming in agony as yet another bone breaks. We're all pretty much begging him to stop at this point, but he just keeps smashing that baseball bat down onto our mate, barking at us to give him everything we've got or he'll just kill our mate. I think the only thing that saved his life was the appearance of another masked lad in the doorway who told him that they had to leave before the police showed up. And at that, the raiders were gone as quickly as they'd come. They'd ransacked the entire house, beaten up anyone who so much as put up an ounce of resistance. The whole place was just in shock. Girls were crying or wailing over the unconscious bodies of those lads they'd knocked out with bats or brass knuckles. It was honestly like walking through a war zone as I shakily plodded down the stairs, surveying the scene while my mates tried to tend to the guy who'd had the absolute life beaten out of him. Because they'd taken most people's phones, I think only a handful of people left at the party were able to actually get in touch with emergency services. I remember a few of them sort of going from room to room, trying to give the 999 operators a kind of damage report, telling them exactly how many injured people there were. There were police cars everywhere within the hour, and I think maybe about 4 ambulances turned up to treat the wounded, with another few ferrying the more seriously wounded of us off to the hospital for treatment, which obviously included our mate who'd had his bones broken by the lad with the baseball bat. Once he'd been taken away, there was no reason for us to be there anymore, so we just grabbed a load of ale from the fridge in the house and got walking home. I won't lie, we did take a few cans and bottles that didn't belong to us, but I think we just wanted to drink to forget at that stage. Like, it was probably the single most terrifying, traumatizing thing I'd ever seen in my life up until that point. Like, I know it's a massive cliche, but I heard our mates' screams for months afterwards. Sometimes when there were quieter moments in college or at night, I'd just hear them in my mind. Like not actually hear them, just remember them so vividly that it was like I could hear them, if that makes any sense. Those screams are a sound, along with the sound of bones breaking, that I sincerely hope I never have to hear, ever again. In late 2008, I came one night to find my mom sitting in the kitchen all alone and in floods of tears. When I asked her what was wrong, her answer made my jaw drop. My dad had left her. There was absolutely no indication that anything was wrong with their marriage or that he was remotely unhappy. But that afternoon, while I was out, he had apparently packed a few things into a suitcase, told her he was leaving, and just disappeared. I only mention this because it explains why my mom and little sister just didn't want to be in the house over Christmas and New Year. That kind of family-oriented time of year would have just been way too hard on them, so they basically buggered off to Mexico for a month to just decompress or whatever. Point being, I was all alone for Christmas and New Year's. Christmas Day sucked, and I realized that they were seriously right about not wanting to be alone in the house at that time of year. So for New Year's Eve, I decided to throw a little get-together for me and a load of my mates, hoping that a little party might take away some of the sadness I felt as a result of my dad leaving us. So on the night itself, it ends up being about 20 to 30 of us getting together in my parents' place, getting drunk, listening to music, playing Xbox, just a big hangout among some of the people I was closest to. It was a really good night to start off with, and it really did help take my mind off of things for a little while. We did the whole New Year's countdown thing, set off a few fireworks, generally having a brilliant little night together. But the drunker we all got, the messier things became, until it was just a medley of people throwing up, hooking up in the spare bedroom, or arguing amongst themselves. Two of the people who ended up fighting were my mate Chris and his girlfriend at the time, a girl named Katie. And what I could gather, Katie thought Chris had been flirting with a mutual friend of ours and had taken issue with it. Chris was insisting that they were just being friendly and it was nothing to worry about, but Katie was adamant that something was going on, that he was cheating on her, blah blah blah. You know how it is, teenage drama. Now I know Chris really did love her, so it wasn't like a stand-up argument. It was more like him begging her to see reason and to not go mad and dump him over some perceived bit of flirting. He swore he'd never do anything like that she was the only girl for him, how much he loved her, all this romantic, theatrical stuff that you might expect from two young lovers. It wasn't really anything of my business though, so me and the other party guests just sort of left them to it while we got on with trying to have fun. Then a little while later, I find Chris sitting in the back garden, swigging off a bottle of raw vodka on his own. I go up to him to ask him if he's okay, only to find that he's crying, rotten drunk, saying that Katie had dumped him and gone home. I tried to be a good friend and console him as best I could, saying that she probably was just drunk and over-emotional, how there was a good chance that they'd just get back together over the next couple of days when she'd realized she'd made a mistake. But he was insistent. She was gone for good and they wouldn't be getting back together. All I could do was get him on his feet and hug it out with him. The poor guy really was in one heck of a state, and I managed to convince him to hand over the vodka, drink some water, and then get some sleep in my bed so he could maybe sober up a wee bit before heading on home. He agrees. I tuck him in and then leave him to get some rest. About an hour or so later, the party is winding down and the remainder of us are just chilling in the TV room when someone goes off to use the toilet. They return like seconds later, saying someone's in the bathroom throwing up, then asking if they can go and take a pee in the back garden. Of course, I tell them no. I didn't want them peeing all over my mom's flower beds, and that I'll nip upstairs to see if I can get whoever is out of the bathroom. So I get the toilet upstairs, and I can hear someone gagging and retching on the other side of the locked door. My friend Julia joins me, a wee bit concerned, and starts trying to help me talk to the person who's locked themselves in the bathroom. It's sometime then that I notice that two doors are open, the first being my bedroom, the second being a little cupboard on the first floor landing. I check my bedroom and see that the bed is empty. so it's obviously Chris that's in the bathroom, puking his guts up because of all the vodka he drank. I shut the door to the bedroom, then go to close the door on the other room, which happened to be a little cupboard that my mom kept cleaning supplies in. My first thought was that Chris had opened up that door thinking it was the bathroom in his drunken haze, then legged it to the right bathroom in his desperation to puke. But I noticed something that, at first, I didn't really understand the significance of. The cleaning supplies that my mom usually kept all neat in a little plastic box were spilled all over the floor. Not like open fluids spilling out, they were just all out of the box like someone had been rooting through them. As I'm wondering why someone would do something like that, Julia calls out that the person who'd locked themselves in the bathroom, presumably Chris, had gone quiet all of a sudden, and that they weren't responding. That's when I put two and two together. Violent vomiting, cleaning supplies missing, deep drunken depression. Chris was trying to end his own life. I absolutely pegged it to the bathroom door and started trying to kick the door off the hinges. Julia screams in shock at what I'm doing, and people from the living room start piling out towards the bottom of the stairs in utter confusion. I've been really protective of the house all night, not wanting people smoking inside, not wanting people peeing anywhere they shouldn't, trying to stop spillages and all of that kind of stuff. Then there I was, booting down my own bathroom door. It was way too heavy to actually kick off the hinges, but I did manage to kick a hole in the wood paneling, and that's when I got a look inside. Chris was laying there, a bottle of bleach next to him, and there was like pink puke all over the cistern, the floors, and his clothes. It was pink because he drank the bleach and it had corroded or burned the inside of him so much that he had vomited up blood. We were distraught, terrified, almost sure that he was dead, but we were quick to call an ambulance. Chris had his stomach pumped and he survived, but it took a long time for him to be back to normal. Because he puked, the fumes had damaged his lungs or something. I'm not a doctor, so don't have a go if I get the details wrong. So he had trouble eating, drinking, and breathing for at least a month after that. 12 years later, and I've never forgotten that, and I'm pretty sure neither has he. Because as far as I know, Chris never drank vodka again, because if the smell of it makes me think of that night, God knows what horrible memories it brings back to him. For 18-year-old Marina Bolter of Bloomfield, Indiana, New Year's Eve of 2014 was much like any other. It was a night of excitement and revelry among those nearest and dearest to her. It was also a night when the adults of her family might just be too socially lubricated to notice or care if she happened to be indulging in a little tipple herself. So as the afternoon drew to a close, Marina, who had a part-time job working as a grocery store clerk at the IGA grocery store, boisterously clocked out of her shift and began the journey home to get ready for the New Year's party that she had been planning on going to. Needless to say, she was excited to blow off some steam. You see, 2014 had not been an easy year for Marina. During the summer of 2013, Marina had discovered she was pregnant, and after the birth of her child in April of 2014, Marina had to do some growing up, and fast. She got herself the grocery store job, trying to put her wild child days behind her, and committed herself to being a responsible, loving mother. But God laughs at well-laid plans, and tragedy was about to befall her. In August of 2014, a violent argument erupted at the family home between her older sister and her boyfriend. The argument quickly became physical, one in which household items were thrown around the home, and in a horrendous stroke of misfortune, Marina's baby was injured in the melee. Neighbors happened to catch wind of the injury to the infant and swiftly reported the incident to Child Protective Services. A social worker was dispatched to the home, who, with a heavy heart, made the decision to remove the child from the home and place them into foster care. Marina was devastated and vowed to do everything she could to win back her child. But it was not to be, for yet more tragedy was to strike Marina and her family, because that New Year's Eve, after she clocked out of work, she would never arrive home. In fact, as people would come to learn, it was as if though she had simply dropped off the face of the earth. One of the first places we might wish to look in order to get answers as to what happened to her is her relationship with a young man by the name of DJ Lockhart. Marina had a rather tempestuous, on-again, off-again love affair with DJ, who was the father of Marina's child. They were young, foolish, and headed in two very different directions in life. But as Marina's mother insisted in the years after her disappearance, they were very much in love. Despite what many have said about DJ possibly being responsible for Marina's disappearance, there are just as many who are or were close to the Bolter and Lockhart families that insisted that DJ was only guilty of loving her too much, given that he was devastated beyond belief at her having vanished on New Year's Eve. Yet there is another man in Marina's life who we must consider as a possible suspect, or who at least may have had a hand in facilitating her disappearance. In late 2014, Marina and DJ were not seeing eye to eye at all, and to all outside observers, it seemed they had definitely broken up. This was mainly because Marina seemed to be seeing other people, mainly an older man named Toby, who she seemed to be rather secretive over. But she was being secretive about him for good reason. You see, not only was this older man married, but he was actually an old friend of the Bolter family, one that had known Marina's parents ever since she was born. Toby acted as something of a sugar daddy towards Marina, helping her out financially until she was able to afford the rent on her own apartment. However, it's important to note that Marina having her own place was one of the stipulations for regaining custody of her own child. It appears that Toby was less of a serious relationship option and more of a means to an end. But as much as Marina tried to keep the relationship a secret, in a small town like Bloomfield, it's only a matter of time before even the deepest secrets see the light of day. And in the process, Toby's wife, who was also an old friend of the Bolter family, discovered her husband's infidelities. And shockingly, it was actually Marina's own mother who informed her of it. So as it turns out, the New Year's Eve party that Marina was supposedly headed to that night was none other than Toby's. But as she strolled out of work, calling Toby on her cell phone to confirm a few last-minute arrangements, she spotted someone walking towards her across the store's parking lot. According to Toby, Marina's last words to him before she hung up the phone were, "Uh-oh, it's DJ." Marina did not call Toby back. In that surprise parking lot encounter, DJ straight up told Marina that he knew where she was planning on going for New Year's Eve, adding that he didn't approve of her relationship with Toby whatsoever. He then pleaded with her to attend a New Year's party with him instead, insisting they should work on repairing their relationship for the sake of their child. Marina replied that it was not the time or place to be having such a discussion, that she had made plans with Toby and she was sticking to them. DJ was furious, but supposedly took the rejection on the chin before offering to give her a ride home so she might get out of the cold. But it seems that Marina actually managed to get a ride home from a regular customer. Whether or not she did this out of pure happenstance or begged to be taken home because she was afraid of DJ is entirely up for speculation. But one thing is abundantly clear. The following day, Marina failed to show up for her scheduled New Year's Day shift at the IGA store. Knowing full well that she would head out to a party after work, Marina's employers were initially unsurprised by her unauthorized absence. There had probably been some drinking involved, and with drinking comes hangovers, and with hangovers comes tardiness. But still, they tried her cell phone to see if she was going to be heading into work at some point, yet there was no answer. IGA management then got in touch with Marina's mom, hoping she might be able to provide some answers on her daughter's whereabouts. But Marina's mom hadn't seen her either, and the news that she had failed to show up for work only succeeded in worrying her. She headed over to Marina's apartment, using her spare key to let herself in. There were no signs of any break-ins or struggles, but Marina's purse, cell phone, and keys were all missing, along with her work uniform. This meant that, in all likelihood, she never made it home from work that evening. Marina's mom immediately reported her missing, and a police investigation began shortly afterward. Obviously, given the fact that she seemed to have disappeared immediately after leaving work, police stated very publicly that they wished to speak to the customer who had apparently driven her home that evening. It took 3 whole weeks for the man to come forward, but we can understand why he might be nervous. In an interview with investigating police, the man claimed to have dropped her off at a pizza place near to her home. The restaurant was closed, but Marina apparently openly stated that she didn't want the man to know where she lived. Although this might seem like an unusual thing to say, when it was put to Marina's mom, she attested that it was just the kind of thing her daughter would say, and that to her, it was a totally believable story. This was backed up when the man was made to undergo a polygraph test and pass with flying colors. Despite being one of the main suspects in Marina's disappearance, DJ did all he could to help the family find her, even if it was to no avail. He was said to be absolutely bereft about her disappearance and was never quite the same afterward. Marina's mother spoke highly of the young woman and always insisted that he couldn't have been involved in her vanishing. However, Marina's father and his extended family have perennially viewed the boy with suspicion, openly stating that he had the most to gain from her having disappeared. But the fact remains that we will never truly know if he was responsible, as we will never get a full confession. You see, DJ took to drinking heavily after Marina went missing, getting into more and more trouble with the law and the local populace, so much so that he got into a violent altercation on February 12, 2015, one which ended in him being stabbed to death by the man he had gotten in a fight with. And then there's Toby, Marina's old lover who had given her thousands of dollars to try to help her get her life together. He was one of the last people Marina spoke with on the evening of her disappearance, and one might think that he would cooperate fully with the investigation into her whereabouts. But by all accounts, Toby acted very suspiciously in the months that followed. He apparently stopped talking to Marina's mother altogether, and only involved himself with Marina's father, almost aggressively asserting that DJ was to blame for her disappearance. However, there is another person of interest in this case who we can simply not ignore as a suspect, a man by the name of Vernon Gale Briner. Vernon was a convicted murderer who had been previously sent to prison for the murder of a 19-year-old girl and had only been released from the penitentiary in 2012. As it turns out, Vernon had a solid alibi for his whereabouts at the time, with an employer testifying that he was at work at the time. Vernon also passed a polygraph test in which he was straight up asked if he had done anything to Marina, with the results indicating that he was telling the truth when he said he had nothing to do with her going missing. To this day, there have been no significant clues as to what happened to Marina Bolter. No dead bodies had ever been found that could have matched up to her DNA or description. No one outside of her small hometown has ever seen anything matching her description either. For all intents and purposes, it is as if she just vanished from the face of the earth. It's a terrifying prospect that, even in the digital age, with man's ability to track and trace using the plethora of electronic devices we employ in our daily lives, that a girl as well known and well loved as Marina could simply disappear, never to be seen again. There were many suspects in her case, many people who could have snatched her up and disposed of her in a way that no one would ever find her. But only one man is guilty. Only one person really knows what happened to her, and how her final moments on this earth played out. And to our knowledge, that man is still walking the streets of the United States, knowing he committed perhaps the worst crime imaginable, and knowing that no one can touch him for it. The Melbourne suburb of Pakenham is one of the wealthiest areas in all of Australia. The area is home to several large mansions that house some of Melbourne's most successful business people, boasting sprawling estates with luxury amenities such as swimming pools, boating lakes, and even small-scale golf courses. It's one of these mansions that 45-year-old Michael Griffey called home. He lived with estranged wife Diane, along with children that Michael hardly saw due to his busy work schedule. He would often spend long periods of time living in an apartment he owned in Melbourne itself, using it as a kind of base of operations for his many business ventures, including the parent company D&M Plaster Transport. On December 31st of 2004, Diane and the children were hosting a huge party to celebrate the coming of the new year. Scores of guests swarmed around the grounds of their stunning estate, eating canapes, drinking champagne, and looking back over a year that had brought many of them great financial success. But Michael himself was nowhere to be found. When asked, Diane replied that he was home, but that she had not seen him and was probably milling around somewhere in a drunken haze, socializing with business associates or eyeing up the young cocktail waitresses that floated around with silver trays laden with luxury food and drink. But the reality was something far more disturbing, because although Michael was indeed on the property, just not in the state his loved ones imagined him to be. Because on the evening of January 2nd, 2005, his wife Diane, along with their 17-year-old daughter Cassandra, walked into one of the second-floor office spaces to find Michael lying dead in a pool of his own blood. The mansion was vast, with so many rooms that Michael was found to have been dead for days, simply lying in a room that none of the family had been in for quite some time. The investigating coroner determined through tissue analysis that Michael had been bludgeoned to death at around 3 p.m. on December 29th. Whoever had murdered him had then wrapped his bloodied corpse in a striped bedsheet before attempting to hide it under a tarp. There were 3 large and seemingly fatal wounds on his head, and one obvious defensive injury to his wrist, indicating that he had attempted to fight off his attacker before being overpowered and killed with a blunt object. Police discovered that Michael's wallet and cell phone had been stolen from the property, and that $1,000 had been removed from a safe that only 3 people, one of which was Michael, had the combination to. They also found that 2 pages had been torn from a journal that his family said had a meticulous record of his movements and business dealings. Given that Diane was the beneficiary of both of Michael's life insurance policies, which were valued at almost $2 million, she was one of the first people to be considered as a suspect. Police discovered that not only had she written bad checks in the time before he was killed, but that in the short time before his death, Michael had complained to his friends that his wife was mishandling money, and that he could use this fact to gain the upper hand when it came to dividing up the family finances in the event of a divorce. It was also discovered that Michael was having multiple affairs and financially supporting other women, and that the main reason he was staying in central Melbourne so much was not because of business dealings, but because it afforded him time to indulge in his extramarital affairs. However, he had not done a very good job of keeping this a secret from Diane, and text message exchanges made this very evident indeed. However, Diane's lawyer prevented her from commenting on how this made her feel, and this, along with the other evidence of her financial misdealing, made her the #1 suspect in her husband's murder. She was arrested in 2007, and preliminary hearings began shortly after. Yet the case was not to be a simple one by any stretch of the imagination. Not only was there simply not enough evidence to really charge Diana with Michael's murder, but a number of other twists and turns in the case meant that pinning down a definitive suspect became almost impossible. Bizarrely, during the preliminary hearings of the case against Diane, her and Michael's daughter, Cassandra, the very same one who had found his body on that fateful day in January of 2005, actually attempted to confess to his murder. Despite her insistence that it was she that beat her father bloody in the days after Christmas before attempting to hide his body with a sheet, police noticed a series of inconsistencies in her story and dismissed it as a false attempt to implicate herself in something she had nothing to do with. But the question would cast a shadow on the entire affair for the duration of the investigation. Just why exactly would Cassandra want police to believe that she was the murderer? Police also investigated Michael's son, Kenny, who was something of a playboy, living a fast lifestyle with fast cars and even faster women. There was every reason to believe that he too needed money, but again there was very little evidence to suggest that he had even had it in him to plot the murder of his own father, let alone go through with it. Police managed to secure an interview with one of Michael's mistresses, a woman by the name of Jillian Gold, who had apparently been engaged in an affair with Michael for the better part of 5 years. She knew that she was not the only woman who Michael had been seeing, but since he had essentially funded her lifestyle and was not written to his will, there was absolutely no reason to believe that she was the one who had killed him. However, there was a chance that since Michael was known to partake in sugar daddy-style relationships, that breaking it off with one of his so-called sugar babies had resulted in an argument that may have resulted in a kind of revenge killing. But since Jillian was completely ignorant of these other women's identities, she couldn't point police in their direction, and the investigation into being an affair-related murder floundered. Police then got in touch with Katrina Fitzpatrick, Michael's sister, who told the police of a rather worrying encounter she shared with her brother in the time before her brother's death. Around a month before he was found dead, Michael got in touch with Katrina in an attempt to arrange a meetup with her. She had dithered over a time and place, citing her busy work schedule, but Michael had almost violently insisted that they meet as soon as possible. They met in a high-end cafe in downtown Melbourne, and from the get-go, Katrina noticed that Michael appeared to be acting extremely shadily. She had apparently tried to confront him on the reason for his off behavior several times, but was rebuffed on each occasion, with Michael insisting on reminiscing about happier times, including their childhood together. By the end of the conversation, Katrina, admitting to be extremely worried for her brother's mental state, and pressed him for one final time about the reason for their meeting. Michael barely said another word, instead opting to present her with an expensive piece of jewelry, beginning to cry as he told her he loved her. Michael then departed the meeting, and Katrina never saw him alive again. There happens to be another interesting aspect to this case, albeit one we might struggle to fit into the bigger picture. In the year 2008, almost 4 years after Michael's murder, it was discovered that his plaster transport company was facing dire financial difficulties in the run-up to his killing. Michael owed over $1 million in taxes to the Australian government, as well as owing $100,000 in loans to other creditors. A lot of this loan money could be accounted for, but some of it could not, and it's possible that Michael owed money to some people that it might be extremely dangerous to owe money to, the kind of people that, if it appeared that the debt might not be repaid, might simply have Michael killed as a warning to others. So the question remains, just who killed Michael Griffey, and what exactly were their motives? There was no doubt that Michael seemed to know he was in danger. The teary encounter with his sister is a testament to that. There's also the possibility that he believed or knew that he wasn't safe in his own home, which is why he stayed so often in the downtown Melbourne apartment. The fact that he seems to have been murdered in his own home is all the evidence we require to back this theory up. There's every chance that Michael was murdered as a result of his debts, but the fact that his daughter tried to confess to his murder throws a huge wrench into the works of such a theory. She was obviously trying to cover for him, but whether or not she was trying to cover for her mother or her brother is another question entirely. I think we can all agree that this is frankly terrifying, that someone's own family might well be involved in their murder, and that those that are supposed to love and cherish us are just as capable of snuffing out our lives in the name of greed or malice. Whether or not answers will finally come out regarding his death is anyone's guess, but for the time being, Michael's death will remain yet another unsolved mystery, and his killer is free to walk the streets. It's not just the insurgents or Western militaries that make Afghanistan such a dangerous place. Even the land and the weather itself seem to be out to kill you. Despite being thought of as a scorched and arid country, the average temperature in this far eastern area of Afghanistan during the wintertime is just above freezing point, and at night, temperatures have been known to dip as low as minus 25 degrees Celsius. And it was on a freezing cold New Year's Eve up in Forward Operating Base Matar Lam that U.S. Army Sergeant Anton R. Phillips found himself feeling terribly lonesome. It was yet another holiday season away from his beloved daughters, 13-year-old Lexus, 8-year-old Antoneth, and 5-year-old Alina. And being stuck in a support fob in eastern Afghanistan when all he wanted in the world was to hug his family and sink a few beers to welcome in the new year, Sergeant Phillips felt like he might as well be on another planet. Forward Operating Base Matar Lam was, by that time, home to a few hundred soldiers, most from the 2nd Infantry Brigade Combat Team, 34th Infantry Red Bull Division. It was one of the larger FOBs in the province of Lagman, and was well on its way to attaining a built-up status, which means that base officials were planning on having a post-exchange store constructed, as well as several other amenities normally associated with larger operating bases. There was even a small recreation ground which the soldiers had christened Pease Park, an area of the base that functioned as a kind of workout or hangout area. Soldiers would go over to Pease Park to either smoke up or bulk up, depending on whether or not they felt the urge for self-improvement or self-destruction, and missing one's family could definitely bring on a longing for the latter. So it was this area of the base that Sergeant Phillips decided to wander off to, in an effort to kill some time and take his mind off of how much he missed his family. As we've established, Afghan winter nights can be incredibly frigid, and Sergeant Phillips' platoon mates did not expect him to hang around Pease Park for very long, not unless he was planning on freezing to death. Yet when almost an hour and a half had passed by, and Sergeant Phillips still hadn't returned to his living quarters, his buddies started to grow a little concerned and decided to go looking for him. He had mentioned to them that he was going to head up towards Pease Park, so his platoon mates headed right in the park's direction in the hopes that they would find him safe and well. It was about halfway into the walk to the park that Sergeant Phillips' platoon mates saw him lying in the dirt, bleeding profusely from multiple stab wounds. They tried to get a response from him, calling out his name and slapping him around the face in an attempt to rouse him from his unconsciousness, but it was no good. Phillips was pale and cold to the touch. His platoon mates screamed for a medic, and it should be noted that those that tried to save his life did so speedily and efficiently, but it was no use. Sergeant Phillips had no pulse, and no amount of blood transfusions or shock padding could bring him around. Shortly afterward, his platoon mates were heartbroken to hear that their friend and fellow soldier had lost his life. Forward Operating Base Matar Lam immediately went into lockdown, as it was initially believed that the wounds had been inflicted by Taliban fighters that had somehow snuck past the base's secure perimeter. The base was searched from top to bottom by the FOB's Quick Reaction Force, but no Taliban fighters were found, and the preliminary assumption was, as was previously stated, that there had been some kind of sneak attack undertaken by the enemy. But as the weeks went by, there were a number of seriously unusual things to note about the investigation into Sergeant Phillips' death. Usually speaking, when an American soldier is killed in a foreign country, there is an immediate communications ban imposed on soldiers so that news of the death doesn't somehow make its way to the American media. The last thing the military wants is for the soldiers' family members to hear rumors or speculation of the death from a news outlet instead of from representatives from the armed forces. Then, when definitive answers can be secured as to the reason and circumstances behind the death, the family is notified. Then and only then are details released to media outlets. This process can take anything from just 24 hours to a couple of days, but in the case of Sergeant Phillips, the U.S. Army took a full 3 weeks to announce his death, and even then refused to release any details on exactly how he had lost his life. Obviously, this was highly unorthodox in terms of military procedure, and Phillips' family, who were already heartbroken by his untimely death, were left with even more anguish as they struggled to get straight answers on just how he had died. As time went on, the Army made a series of decisions that appeared to shed some light on the circumstances of Sergeant Phillips' death. Army Command saw fit to posthumously award Sergeant Phillips the Purple Heart Medal, an award that is only given for wounds sustained during combat with the enemy, and one that is not given in the event of a non-combat death or a homicide within the ranks. He was also awarded a Bronze Star, a medal that is awarded by any person who distinguishes himself or herself by heroic or meritorious achievement, or service in connection with military operations. And to top it off, Sergeant Phillips was posthumously promoted to Staff Sergeant. Obviously, this suggests that Army Command had discovered that Sergeant Phillips had undertaken some act of bravery of heroism that ended in the loss of his life, and that it had potentially involved combat with enemy forces, be they Taliban or otherwise. Yet even after these accolades were awarded, there remained many unanswered questions regarding Staff Sergeant Phillips' death, answers which the Army seemed to possess but were unwilling to divulge. Yet even the military seemed only too willing to admit that they didn't have all the facts surrounding the case. The U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command announced that they were offering a $25,000 reward for any information that would lead to the arrest of those responsible for Staff Sergeant Phillips' death. They also leaked information that they believe there may be a link between Phillips' death and a service member based in the area of the National Training Center outside of Barstow, California. Army CID also stated that they were interested in talking to service members in bases around the area of Colorado Springs. We have reason to believe that someone who knows something about the untimely death of the soldier, and we are not giving up and determined to bring those responsible to justice, said CID spokesman Chris Gray. We strongly encourage anyone with information to contact us immediately. These statements raised many questions. Do the Army suspect that whoever murdered Sergeant Phillips were actually a serving member of America's armed forces? Were investigators lied to in the aftermath, possibly by the murderer themselves? Did they tell investigators that Phillips had died as a result of a Taliban sneak attack, and was this what led him being awarded the Purple Heart and other accolades? These are just a handful of the questions that have so far been unanswered, and that means Sergeant Phillips' death remains shrouded in secrecy and mystery. The only thing that's clear is that the whole episode leaves a very bad taste in the mouth. The U.S. military clearly doesn't know everything about his death, but has also decided that what it does know is most definitely not fit for public consumption. Whatever happened to Sergeant Phillips that night is either so terrifying or ominous that neither the general public nor his fellow soldiers can be allowed to know the truth, or so outrageous that it would cause mass protests and resignations among the general staff. Was his death a result of the Taliban sneak attack, or was some other nation-state involved in the surveillance or infiltration of American military bases in the region? It's entirely possible that if discovered, a Russian or Iranian special forces operator would resort to deadly force to ensure their presence remain undetected. Or it may be a simple case of murder in the ranks. That's always a possibility. Yet given the CID investigated the case thoroughly and decided to award medals normally associated with a combat death, it definitely seems as if something else is at work here. Something horrifying enough to be kept a closely guarded secret by the U.S. military. Either way, Sergeant Phillips' death is likely to remain yet another chilling unsolved mystery that professional and amateur sleuths alike are bound to ponder over for many, many years to come. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, booty butt, booty butt, booty butt cheeks.